So, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, at Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make resources such as books and courses and information for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice but maybe don't know where to start or can't find out the information they need. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you, and I can't wait to get started. So let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. We're going to be talking today about how to make something perfectly flat, dry it perfectly flat in pottery. So you might want to do something like this if you're making something, say, that needs to be really, really flat, like a coaster or something. This is what I make in my pottery practice, and I make a lot of coasters. I stamp the word Oxford in them. I sell them in a couple of local shops in Oxford, and to yeah. You really do need a coaster to be perfectly flat because we're going to be setting a drink on there, and if it's not flat, it's just not going to work as a coaster. So, yeah, like I will tell you my technique that I use to get these coasters perfectly, perfectly flat. And then you'll know how to get your pottery perfectly flat if you ever want to make something perfectly flat or like a coaster or something. Okay, so getting something perfectly flat in pottery actually begins before you start making the thing, right? So when I was at evening classes, learning pottery, the teacher used to say to me, okay, so basically, if I was trying to make something on the wheel and like it wasn't working out, this would often happen, by the way. It would often happen where you're like trying to make something and you were trying to center a pot on the wheel and like it just wasn't working, or like you were trying to make the pot and it was all just going all wiggly and you just couldn't do it. The teacher would say to me, it was so frustrating because like the week before or something, it would be fine. You kind of were able to make something, and then this week's just not happening. The teacher would say, "Have you wedged the clay properly?" Right? Which some potters call this like kneading the clay as well. So, but at this pottery class, they would call it wedging, and they were like, "Have you wedged the clay properly?" And I would like, do you know what? Probably not as properly as I could have done. So, this is where making something perfectly flat begins. You need to really, really wedge or knead wedge that clay properly really well. So wedging clay properly is really important because it like makes the clay an even texture. So you might have some like slightly like maybe slightly drier bits in that clay, slightly wetter bits in the clay. And the teacher at the pottery class would say that by wedging the clay, you're aligning those clay molecules all together, aligning the clay particles. And it just means that when you make something, you can just make it like evenly, smoothly. It will just make, you won't get like this wibbly wobbly effect when you're trying to make something, trying to center it. So by wedging the clay really, really well, then it enables you to, like we're talking about like rolling clay out, it enables you to roll a really flat piece. You're not going to have like lumps and bumps in there. You're not going to have bits which are drier and that could pull it out of shape as it's drying, bit like wetter bits. It's going to be all really even. All those molecules are going to be like, the clay particles are going to be like totally aligned, and you're going to get like a beautiful flat surface. Okay, so how long is wedging clay really, really well for? Like, what is that? What does that really mean? So I think, just judging from my own pottery practice, I would say probably about 4 minutes, just constantly wedging the clay. 4 minutes, maybe even 5 minutes. That is wedging clay really well. It's going to mean there's no air bubbles in there. Everything's all aligned. It's all mixed really, really well. That is probably the optimum time to wedge your clay. So okay, so yeah, just to say, in the pottery class I went to, they taught us like I think it's called the ox head method of wedging clay. So you basically take your two hands and you're pushing into the clay, you're bringing it round, you're pushing again, and then you kind of just gradually kind of kneading the clay that way over 5 minutes. Okay, so that's step number one. Okay, step number two is that you want to roll your clay out really evenly. Okay, so the way I do this is I basically have rolling guides. So rolling guides are basically just like two pieces of wood, Just looking around to see if I've got my rolling guides. Here we go. So they're just two like very flat pieces of wood that are a certain thickness. Okay, so you can get them in different thicknesses. You could even just use, a piece of wood you get from the hardware store, as long as they are both the same size, because the on each side. Because the idea is that the rolling pin that you're going to be rolling the clay out with rests on these rolling guides, and that is how you get a completely even piece of clay. So you keep on rolling that clay out until it can't go down anymore. The guides are stopping it, and then it's completely even the whole way around. So that's how you get like a completely flat, even surface that's the same thickness all the way around. Is rolling guides. And when I roll my clay out, I basically roll it out on a cloth. So I use like a tea towel, which is like a very lovely, like fine grained cloth. And I can just roll it out on a very flat surface, a nice flat table with the rolling guides, the rolling pin. And I got my totally perfectly flat piece of clay that I can then cut my coaster out on. Okay, so basically, then what I do is I get and get these things called like tile cutters, which I got from Pottery Supplier. And it's like a big sort of cutter. If you imagine like that you would cut like, say, like pastry out of. You can use, baking equipment to do this too. But tile cutters are great because they basically will allow you to push down, and mine is a circle. So push down, and then they have a kind of mechanism which enables you to push that piece of clay out onto a cloth or something. So that's what I do. I basically cut it out, then push it out onto the cloth, and you get this perfectly flat piece of clay. Then I like push, put my design in them. So I stamp like an Oxford design in it, and so I'm interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make your own pottery glaze recipe. So if you are a total beginner to glaze making and it's something you've wanted to maybe try, but you're not really sure where to start, this guide is specifically designed to take you through all the steps you need to know from start to finish, all the ingredients you need, all the equipment you need, and also how to fire your pottery glaze at the end. So, even if you're not new to glaze making and you just want a pottery glaze recipe that's very simple and specifically made with eco conscious ingredients, then this guide is also for you. So, you can get the guide in the show notes, there's a link, but also you can go on to the Oxford Clay website at www.oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. Okay, let's go back to the episode. And then this is the crucial top tip for drying your clay perfectly flat, is that clay, if it's left to its own devices, will often like curl up. And I think this is because the top of it is drying faster than the base of it, which is on whatever flat surface you're drying it on. So what you need to do with your flat piece of clay is, once you finish, doing what you need to do, like making it, I often actually leave the decoration until the clay is a little bit less soft. So not quite leather hard, but like a little bit less soft and very, very soft clay. That's when I'm doing my designing in it, like pushing sort of decoration in it. So then what you need to do is actually like somehow squash your clay down, like sort of press it down. We're not pressing it down hard, but we're pressing it down using some kind of flat surface on top of it, whilst it's drying. So this is a crucial thing. We need to dry it flat. We need to compress it as it's drying. Not We're not compressing it hard, like I said. But how I do this is basically I roll my clay out. I've got my flat piece of clay on a table, and then what I do is actually I put a cloth on top of it. So it's on top of a cloth already, and this enables me to like peel the cloth, take the cloth off the table. It's not going to stick to that table. So we've got cloth, piece of clay. I put another cloth on top, and this helps to kind of dry out the clay. It helps prevent like any condensation as it's drying. And then what I do is I actually sandwich it between the table and a slate. Just going to show you this slate here. It's basically like it's actually like like for a place setting slate. So you can use any kind of anything which is flat, anything which is perfectly flat. So you could use you could even use like a book or something. Although it might get I suppose it might get a little bit wet um, as the clay is drying. But you could use like a wooden board or something. You could use like like a chopping board, anything which is perfectly flat and going to kind of not too heavy, but is going to compress that clay as it's drying. And then you basically just leave it there to dry. But you don't want to leave it there to dry till it's like bone dry. I usually kind of take it out, and I usually kind of, just sponge the surface, tidy up the edges, and then when it's actually just doing its final stage of drying, that's the point when I'll just like leave it to dry its own devices, basically just on a shelf when it's bone dry. So once it gets past the stage where it's like, I would say kind of past leather hard stage where it's not going to curl up, it's dried evenly enough and it's not going to curl up, then you can kind of dry it safely on a shelf. So this one that I'm holding up is kind of, it's still wet clay, but it's so dry that it's kind of hardened. It's not going to, it can't curl up anymore because it's just like, yeah, pretty much nearly dry. Yeah, so there we go. So to just to summarize, how to get something perfectly flat in pottery is you wedge your clay really well. So all those the clay particles are all like the same direction. There's no hard bits, soft bits in that clay. It's all like nice even. You roll it out so it's nice and flat using rolling guides, and then you compress the clay as it's drying. So but not too much. So using a cloth is a great way of doing this, sandwiching it in between two pieces of cloth. That will absorb the moisture really nicely. You won't get condensation on like your board or whatever you're squashing it with, and that clay will just dry really, really nicely. Yeah, great. So those are my top tips for drying clay flat. Oh, clay, yeah, it's so annoying. It's always doing that curling up thing, cracking thing. Yeah, it's important to say actually before we end the episode that if your clay is quite dry already, compressing it down can actually just crack it. So it's important to kind of compress it, when it's kind of still pretty wet clay. Because otherwise you can just like crush whatever you're making. Which is really annoying. So yeah, you don't want it to be too dry when you're compressing it in that, the cloth compressing under a board thing. Yeah, so yeah, I hope that's been like interesting to listen to, like how I sort of get like perfectly flat coasters, perfectly flat. I mean, I would say saying perfectly flat, but I mean, is anything ever perfect in pottery? Of course it's not. And then we don't want it to be perfect. We want it to have that like beautiful like mark of the maker. But yeah, we do want coasters to be roughly flat. That would be good. So yeah, it's been so nice talking to you about it today, like how to get like flat-ish, perfectly flat coasters. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining me on this one. And until then, wishing you very happy potting, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye. Oh, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're interested to learn more about eco conscious pottery or making your pottery more eco conscious and sustainable, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.